Good afternoon, sir and classmate. My name is Clysa Salazar from B at 2E and I am the first reporter of the Group 5. So today, we will discuss about the characteristic of a high-quality assessment task. So let's begin. Assessment methods should possess qualities in order to be efficient in reflecting students' performance. It is very important for assessment methods to have these qualities since these are the means for the teacher to obtain data and information about each student's extent of learning. If these are not present, then the evaluation and assessment will be questionable. It will also not give clear answer as to whether or not instructional objectives and goals were met. So, generally, assessment method should possess the following. First is the validity. Second is the reliability. Third is the fairness. And fourth is the practicality and efficiency. So, what is validity? Validity is the extent to which a test measures what it intends to measure. It is also refers to the appropriateness, correctness, meaningfulness, and usefulness of the specific decision made by the teacher. The most basic definition of validity is that an instrument is valid if it measures what it intends to measure. It is easier to understand this definition through looking at example of invalidity. So, for example, you are an English teacher and you administer a reading test that meant to measure literacy of the student. But that reading test is given in a very small font size. So, what do you think will happen if that is the situation? Maybe the other students with good eyesight will pass the reading test, but on the other hand, there is a possibility that a highly literate student with bad eyesight may fail the test because they can physically read the passages supplied. So, kahit gaano kagaling magbasa yung bata na may poor eyesight o malabo ang mata, may possibility na bumagsak siya dun sa reading test dahil ganun yung given or ganun yung font size. So, kung ganun yung test, it will not be valid if you are measuring the literacy of your students. Though it may be valid if you are measuring the eyesight of the students. That example highlights the fact that validity is wholly dependent on the purpose behind the test. More generally, in a study blocked by weak validity, it would be possible for someone to fail the test situation rather than the intended test subject. Remember that the validity of an instrument is aligned with the learning outcome. So validity can be divided into several different categories, some of which relate very closely to one another. So we will discuss a few of the most relevant categories in the following slides. So here are the four main types of validity. First, we have the construct validity. It has a question. Does the test measure the concept that it's intended to measure? Second is the content validity. Is the test fully representative of what it aims to measure? The third is the phase validity. Does the content of the test appear to be suitable to its aim? And lastly is the criterion validity. Do the results correspond to a different test of the same thing? So let's begin with the construct validity. But first, what is a construct? A construct refers to our concept or characteristic that can't be directly observed but can be measured by observing other indicators that are associated with it. So, when we're talking about a construct in relation to testing and construct validity, it has nothing to do with the way a test is designed or constructed. construct is something that happens in the brain, like a skill, level of emotions, ability, or proficiency. For example, proficiency in any language is a construct because we can't directly observe. So what exactly is a construct validity? Construct validity refers to the nature of psychological construct or characteristic being measured by the test. If we say psychological construct, we can't measure it directly, right? Because it's occurring in our mind, in our brain, and we can see it. For example, there is no objective observable entity called depression that we can measure directly. But based on existing psychological research and theory, we can measure depression. We can measure depression based on a collection of symptoms and indicators such as low self-confidence and low energy levels. Meaning to say, we can't directly say that a person has a depression when we first met that person. But because of the psychological theory and researches, we can measure the depression based sa mga symptoms na pinoportray nila or pinapakita nila. Ganun din sa isang classroom set. We can't directly observe the construct of intelligence of a child in a particular topic, but because of the assessment tool na dinedevelop o ide-develop natin that only focus on the construct that you want to measure, that's the time that you can enable to measure that intelligence o yung natutunan ng isang bata sa pinag-aralan nyo. So, construct validity is about ensuring that the method of measurement matches the construct you want to measure. If you develop a questionnaire to diagnose depression, you need to know, does that questionnaire really measure the construct of depression, or it is actually measuring the respondent's mood, self-esteem, or some other construct. To achieve construct validity, you have to ensure that your indicators and measurements are carefully developed based on relevant existing knowledge. The questionnaire must include only relevant questions that measure known indicators of construct of intelligence in a particular subject or topic. The other types of validity on the next slide can all be considered as forms of evidence for construct validity. Next is the content validity. Content validity assesses whether a test is representative of all aspects of the construct. It is used when you want to know whether a sample of items truly reflects an entire universe of possible items in a certain topic. Okay, that's pretty wordy, but I can illustrate this in a very simple idea with an example. So let's say, as a professor of statistics, I want to design a test to measure my students' ability in statistics. So the test should cover every form of statistics that was taught in the class. If some types of statistics are left out, then the result may not be an accurate indication of students' understanding of the subject. So similarly, if I include questions that are not related to statistics, the results are no longer valid measure of statistic knowledge. Here is an example of test that has a bad content validity. Question 1, calculate the mean. Question 2, calculate the mean. Question 3, calculate the mean, and so on. Think about our definition. This doesn't accurately kind of sample that really represent the set of question that covers the entire content that we're learning about statistics. Instead, I might wanna ask my students something like this on the final exam. For example, question 1, calculate the mean. Question 2, calculate the standard deviation. 3, correlation and t-test. And other topic that taught in a statistic. So, this is much better This has higher and great content validity because I'm doing the job that covering all the content we learn about in the test. So that's the content validity. Remember this, to produce valid results, the content of a test survey or measurement method must cover all the relevant parts of the subject it aims to measure. If some aspects are missing from the measurement or if irrelevant aspects are included, the validity is threatened. The third one is the face validity. Face validity is the extent to which a test is subjectively viewed as covering the concept it tends to measure. It refers to the transparency or relevance of a test as it appears to test participants. In other words, a test can be said to have face validity if it looks like it is going to measure what it is supposed to measure. For instance, if a test is prepared to measure whether students can perform multiplication and the people to whom it is shown all agree that it looks like a good test of multiplication ability, this demonstrates face validity of the test. Some people use the term face validity to refer only to the validity of the test to observers who are not expert in testing methodologies. For instance, if a test is designed to measure whether children are good spellers and parents are asked whether the test is a good test, this measures the face validity of the test. But if an expert is asked instead, some people would argue that this does not measure face validity. This distinction seems too careful for most applications. Generally, face validity means that the test looks like it will work as supposed to has been shown to work. As face validity is a subjective measure, it's often considered the weakest form of validity. However, it can be useful in the initial stages of developing a method or an assessment task. The last type of validity is what we call criterion validity. Criterion validity evaluates how closely the result of your test correspond to the result of a different test. But what is a criterion? The criterion is an external measurement of the same thing. It is usually an established or widely used test that is usually considered valid. To have better understanding about criterion validity, here is an example. A university professor creates a new test to measure applicants' English writing ability. To assess how well the test really does measure students' writing ability, she finds an existing test that is considered a valid measurement of English writing ability and compares the result when the same group of students take both tests. If the outcomes are very similar, the new test has a high criterion validity. Again, the four main types of validity are the construct validity, the content validity, the face validity, and the criterion validity. And it is important to consider the validity of an instrument tool that will be used in assessing the students because it helps the teacher to have deeply understanding about their students' learning and needs. Again, an instrument is valid when it is aligned with the learning outcome. The next characteristic of a high quality assessment task is the reliability. So what exactly is reliability? Reliability of an assessment tool is the extent to which it consistently and accurately measures learning. Just as we enjoy having reliable smartphones that start or open every time we need them. Another way to think of reliability is to imagine a kitchen scale. If you weigh 5 pounds of potatoes in the morning and the scale is reliable, the same scale should register 5 pounds for the potatoes an hour later, unless of course you peel it and cook them. Likewise, instruments such as classroom tests and nationally standardized exam should be reliable because when the result of an assessment are reliable, we can be confident that repeated or equivalent assessment will provide consistent results. This puts the teachers in a better position to make generalized statements about a student's level of achievements, which is especially important when they are using the results of an assessment to make decisions about teaching and learning, or when they are reporting back to students and their parents or caregivers. There are four main types of reliability. Each can be estimated by comparing different sets of results produced by the same method. First, we have the test-retest reliability that focus in the same test over time. Next is the inter-rater, the same test conducted by different people. Next is the parallel forms, different versions of a test which are designed to be equivalent. And lastly is the internal consistency, the individual items of a test. The first type of reliability is the test-retest reliability. It measures the consistency of the results when you repeat the same test on the same sample at a different point in time. You use it when you are measuring something that you expect to stay constant in your sample. So how to measure it? To measure test-retest reliability, you conduct the same test on the same group of people at two different points in time. Then you calculate the correlation between two sets of results. For example, you design a test to assess student learning in psychology that could be given to a group of students twice, with the second administration perhaps coming a week after the first. Like, for example, a test on Monday, then again the following Monday. If the test results of your students are significantly different, the test-retest reliability of the test is low. So why test-retest reliability is important? Many factors can influence your result at different points in time. For example, students might experience different moods or external conditions might affect their ability to respond accurately, and even the environment when they are taking the test. So, the job of test-retest reliability can be used to assess how well a method resists these factors over time. The smaller the difference between the two sets of results, the higher the test-retest reliability. The next is the inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability, also called inter-observer reliability, measure the degree of agreement between different people observing or assessing the same thing. You use it when data is collected by researchers assigning ratings, scores, or categories to one or variables. Inter-rater reliability is the most easily understood form of reliability because everybody has encountered it. For example, watching any sport using judges such as Olympics ice skating or dog shows and dance competitions and many more that uses judges. So it relies upon human observers maintaining a great degree of consistency between observers. Why inter-rater reliability is important? As mentioned, tests that requires judges or rater are most often some type of performance assessment, where the focus on the assessment is on process and products. Performance assessments requires individuals to generate a response, demonstrate a skill, or perform a task. The key features of a performance assessment is the requirements that an individual do something, like perform in some way to obtain a score. So, as we tackled the past reports about assessment is not just like a pencil and paper test. It also include the performance of a child, of a student. So, inter-rater reliability is important because it is used in a observational assessment task. So, and people are subjective, so different observers' perceptions of situation and phenomena naturally differ. So, reliable assessment aims to minimize subjectivity as much as possible so that a different panel, judge, or inter-rater could replicate the same results. So, how to measure inter-rater reliability? To measure inter-rater reliability, different researchers or inter-raters conduct the same measurements or observation on the same sample, then calculate the correlation between their different sets of results. If all the researchers give similar ratings, the test has high inter-rater reliability. Take note that to improve the inter-rater reliability of an assessment task, it is important to consider that when designing the scale and criteria for data collection, it's important to make sure that different people will rate the same variable consistently with minimal bias. This is especially important when there are multiple inter-raters involved in data collection or analysis. So that's all about inter-rater reliability. The next type of reliability is what we call parallel forms reliability. Parallel forms reliability measures the correlation between two equivalent versions of a test. You use it when you have two different assessment tools or sets of questions designed to measure the same thing. It is important if you want to use multiple different versions of a test. For example, to avoid respondents repeating the same answer from their memory. You first need to make sure that all the set of questions or measurements gives a reliable results. Like for example, in educational assessment, it is often necessary to create different versions of a test to ensure that students don't have access to the question in advance. So, parallel forms reliability means that if the students take two different versions of a test, of a reading comprehension test, they should get similar results in both tests. The last type of reliability is what we call the internal consistency. Internal consistency assesses the correlation between multiple items in a test that are intended to measure the same construct. You can calculate the internal consistency without repeating the test or involving other researchers, so it's a good way of assessing reliability when you only have one data set. It is important when you devise a set of questions or ratings that will be combined into an overall scores. You have to make sure that all of the items really do reflect the same thing. If responses to different items contradict one another, the test might be unreliable. Under the Internal consistency is the split half method. It assesses the internal consistency of a test, such as psychometric tests and questionnaires. There, it measures the extent to which all parts of the test contribute equally to what is being measured. This is done by comparing the results of one half of a test with the result from the other half. A test can be split in half in several ways. Example is the first half and second half, or by odd and even numbers. If the two halves of the test provide similar results, this would suggest that the test has internal reliability. The reliability of a test could be improved through using this method. For example, any items on separate halves of a test which have a low correlations should either be removed or rewritten. The split half method is a quick and easy way to establish reliability. However, it can only be effective with large questionnaires in which all questions measure the same construct. This means it will not be appropriate for tests which measures different constructs. A basic knowledge of test score reliability and validity is important for making instructional and evaluation decisions about students. The purpose of testing is to obtain a score for an examinee that accurately reflects the examinee's level of attainment of a skill or knowledge as measured by the test. Since instructors assign grades based on assessments information gathered about their students, the information must have a high degree of validity in order to be of value. This variance in score from group to group makes reliability and validity an important consideration when developing, administering assessments, and evaluating students' learning. However, the scores retrieved from a test can be reliable, but not always valid. Furthermore, a test that gives unreliable scores cannot provide valid inferences. If scores are entirely inconsistent for a person, they provide no valuable information. There is no way of knowing which score to use to infer an individual's ability, attitude, or other characteristics. So, it is important to consider the types of validity and reliability in creating and administering an assessment task, because having a reliable and valid instrument that will be used to assess the students will help the teacher to collect data or information about their students' learning, skills, knowledge, characteristic, and capabilities, so that the teacher will know where she can exert more effort in teaching his or her students. And remember that having an understanding of validity and reliability allows educators to make decisions that improve the lives of their students both academically and socially. So let's move on to the third characteristic of a high quality assessment task. So we have the fairness. Fairness in the context of assessment could be described in various ways. For assessment to be fair, teachers should inform students about the goals and objectives of the assessments and what methods of assessment will be used. They also should tell the students how their progress will be evaluated in order for them to organize and manage their resources like time and effort. This is the reason why most of the teachers at the beginning of the school year discuss the grading system and how will they assess and evaluate the students in their subject. So, fairness also involves the idea that assessment is done not to discriminate learners. The purpose is to measure the extent of learning and not to judge the learner. Assessment should as well free from biases and prejudice held by the assessors or the teachers. Fairness means that an assessment should allow for students of both genders and all backgrounds to do equally well. All students should have equal opportunity to demonstrate the skills and knowledge being assessed. The fairness of the assessment is jeopardized if bias exists either in the task or in the rater. Bias in the task is similar to the idea of extraneous interference. Bias, however, refers to things that systematically affect entire groups of students rather than individual students. Consider the example that I will be provide on the next slide. So here is the first example. If a task is set in the context of football and students who have a knowledge of football have an advantage on the task, that knowledge is an extraneous factor. The context becomes a biasing factor if particular groups of students know less about football than the other group of students. Next example is in this society, few girls have experience playing football. If boys in general have experience with the game and more knowledge of its structures and rules, then the task could be biased in favor of boys. So, for an assessment task to be fair, its content, context, and performance expectations should reflect knowledge, values, and experiences that are equally familiar and appropriate to all students. Top knowledge and skills that all students have had adequate time to acquire. Be as free as possible of cultural, ethnic, and gender stereotyping. An assessment procedure needs to be fair. This means it should include the practicality and efficiency. This is the last characteristic of a high quality assessment task. So, something practical is something effective in real situation. For instance, classroom teachers are well familiar with practical issues, but they need to think of how practical matters relate to testing. A good classroom test should be teacher-friendly. A teacher should be able to develop, administer, and mark it within the available time and with available resources. Classroom tests are only valuable to students when they are returned promptly and when the feedback from assessment is understood by the students. In this way, students can benefit from the test-taking process. In creating a high-quality assessment task that includes practicality and efficiency, it is important to answer these questions. First, will the test take longer to design than apply? Second, will the test be easy to mark? So, these questions should consider in creating an assessment task. So, tasks can be made more practical by making it more objective. An assessment method should be practical in the sense that the teacher should be familiar with it, does not require too much time, and is in fact implementable. A complex assessment procedure tends to be difficult to score and interpret, resulting in a lot misdiagnosis or too long a feedback period, which may render the test inefficient. So that's the practicality and efficiency of an high quality assessment task. Remember that we are a future educator, so it is important to consider this characteristic in creating a high-quality assessment task because assessments are a valuable tool in education and learning because it helps the educators or teachers to assess a student's level of achievements in regard to a particular subject or topic, and it also provides to the instructors with feedback about the effectiveness of their teaching. With this, it allows educators to make decisions that improve the lives of their students both academically and socially. Remember this: to teach is to touch life forever. And that's all. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a good day and stay safe and God bless you.